Let's see if I can share. Let's see if I. Ooh, come on, in the room. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Hopefully, everybody has been doing great. Hopefully, everybody has been doing great. How is everybody? Blessings and love the outfit. Well, no coincidence. I've been feeling like I'm in war mode for at least a week now. So I'm trying to get away from my fatigues, but oh gosh, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. That's to sum it up. It's Cassandra. Okay, good. Good to see you, Cassandra. Yes, ma'am. As the millennials would say, the enemy can really catch these hands. He can catch these hands. This is how I've been feeling all week. He can catch these hands, these hands. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. These hands right here. He can catch them. So I'm excited, as you all can tell. This week, I'm probably not going to be doing my regular scheduled broadcasting. I'm going to, every day, I'm going to try to expound on some of my experiences from this past week. If you were watching my broadcast earlier this week, I got a chance to share just a little bit of my adventure. But now that I'm out of the area and I'm, trying to settle back into my broadcast schedule, I'll be able to talk a little bit more in detail about all of the things that I experience and how they all tie in together. So I'm going to be doing a segment this week basically called The Triangle of White Supremacy. So if you have white friends, please share these broadcasts with them. It is 2018 and it is time out for people feigning ignorance or still remaining ignorant concerning the plight of Black people in America, past and present. And we're trying to end future. So, yeah, I, whew, Lord help. Father God, give me the words to say. Give me your wisdom. Give me your strength. Give me your power in Jesus' name. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, Father, for you are my strength and my redeemer. All right. So, earlier this week, well, actually last week, a fellow missionary of ours had offered to uh, basically host us in her timeshare in Williamsburg, Virginia. Now, I've been in Virginia for about since 2011. And I already knew some things about Virginia coming here, and I already knew some things through what I experienced in Virginia since I have been there. But I had not been to Williamsburg, so I didn't know what I was actually in for. And the missionary that was hosting us really did not have an idea of what we were doing on this past Labor Day and how these two things would actually begin to tie in. So we went to Williamsburg, and once we got there, she was saying that it's a historical town and there's all kinds of things that you can do in the area. So we kind of thought like we knew it was a colonial town, but when you go into Williamsburg, you can feel the change in that city. You can actually feel oppression in Williamsburg. I want to say hats off to the apostles and ministers and leaders and preachers that live and work and serve in Williamsburg. And that is your city that you're called to, I want to say hats off to you because you all are the real MVPs. Mm-hmm. Yes. But not just Williamsburg. We came to find out that we were in what they call the historic triangle, the historic triangle of the birthplaces of America. So when we went to Williamsburg, we didn't realize that literally 15 minutes or up the road from Williamsburg is Jamestown. And another 15 minutes around back toward Williamsburg is Yorktown. Now, Yorktown is the place where the American Revolution, one of the wars happened, the major war of the American Revolution, where the Americans with the militia beat the British back from trying to retake over the colonies. Okay. Jamestown is the site where the first Africans, they don't know if they were indentured servants or slaves. They claim to not know this. But that's the site of the first 20 or so odd Africans that were delivered to the shores of America in 1619. You know that date that everybody talks about, that come 2019 will mark 400 years of those, good morning, love, of those first Africans being dropped off on the shores of America. Well, we got an opportunity to stand at the very spot on the shores of America where those first Africans were dropped off. And then Williamsburg, we went and looked around Williamsburg. In Williamsburg is the College of William and Mary. And just from the reports that we've heard coming out of William and Mary, they have some serious issues there with racism and racial bias with their students. We know someone who had to transfer from there personally and actually went through a lawsuit and all of that and won against the college. So I knew that, but I didn't know before going that William and Mary was located in Williamsburg. So that is kind of the setup for what I want to talk to you all about. And so I did bring back kind of some flyers here so you can kind of hopefully see some of the sites that we toured. Some of the sites that we toured. So when you go into, as I said, when you go into Williamsburg, you can actually feel the oppressive presence in Williamsburg. And we went to Old Town, and in Old Town, there is a statue. Another statue. There's a statue sitting in Old Town of Thomas Jefferson with his legs crossed, and he has a document on his lap with the founding fathers, and it says, "We the people," and it's got, the printout of the document, the historical document. And so my husband, being who he is and doing what he does, my husband went over to the statue and he began to address the spirit of Jefferson, the Jeffersonian spirit, and the doctrines of inequality. Yes, you can feel it in Charleston as well. Charleston still has a slave block up in the market square. Yeah. My family, uh, my first ancestors came out of Charleston. Yeah, so that, I believe that that slave block is to remind you that we can put you back on the slave block. That's a whole other city. We'll talk about that possibly later because we've been there to Charleston several times. I love Charleston, but you can feel it there too. You can also feel it in Savannah. Yep. So my husband goes to this statue and he proceeds to address the Jeffersonian spirit. He proceeds to address the doctrines of unequal exchange and the hypocrisy that Jefferson lived in life by claiming to value all human beings and to participate in documents that said all men are created equal while at the same time holding slaves. So as he's talking to this statue and having this conversation, I wish I could have got my camera out sooner to actually capture the people who were standing, the white visitors and tourists who all of a sudden stopped, turned around, and looked at us like they were a lynch mob. I kid you not. If you've ever seen the lynching photographs and the white males and how they're staring at the body of the lynched, that was the look on their faces. Like, how dare you address our God? Because that's what I call it. How dare you address our venerated ancestors that we worship? How dare you say anything addressing Jefferson's hypocrisy? And there was one man that stood there for a good minute, and then there was a couple of white families that were also standing there looking visibly irate. And so I told my husband, "Hun, you might want to wrap up this conversation with Jefferson. You might want to wrap up this conversation that you're having with the statue, because people are angry that you're actually addressing a statue." Just think about that. All right. And of course, maybe a minute after we walked away and we were walking into another part away from the statue, you guessed it, Williamsburg police showed up patrolling the area. So we're probably sure that somebody, got on their phone and dialed the police and said they are disturbing our notions of historical accuracy. All right. So that was kind of our first experience into town and realizing, okay, something is not altogether lovely here. From there, we went to the next day, I believe it was. Yeah, the next day, we went to Jamestown, historic Jamestown. So let me show you, see what we got here. This is, I don't think this is a part of historic Jamestown. All right. And in one area, as you can see, this is not exaggerated in terms of those are the people on the ground and that's the statue. It sits up really, really, really high off of the ground, and it's actually facing the Chesapeake Bay. This is the gentleman who, quote unquote, married Pocahontas. All right, I forget his name at this moment. But when you go into Jamestown, as you can see, I'll just show you the advertising here. All right, the advertising here is questionable. This is the statue of the Pocahontas, which I did go stand by and take a picture. This is the statue of the Pocahontas and the lovely advertisement of the children whose ancestors would have been responsible for her genocide and her people's genocide. That's located near some of the archaeological excavations. All right. And this is some of the excavation that they are doing on the church that was there. Now, on one side of the church, or I believe on this side here, you can't see it by this photograph. As we went through the tour, they talked about a gate that was here where black people could not enter, even into the 1900s. Black people could not enter into this part of the exhibit. They couldn't enter into the church either. I just want you to say law that. Okay. So as we are at Jamestown, part of Jamestown has a piece of island called the Island Loop. It's an island loop trail, and you can either drive it. It's like you can drive it as a tour, or you can walk it as a tour, or you can bike it as a tour. And it's 5 miles long. We chose to bike it because we need exercise. So we got on our bikes and we were biking this path that leads around the island portion. This is where slaves would have been maybe trying to run away, or they would have been trying to escape. There were several intermittent places as we biked that you could see the swamp areas and how difficult it would have been to get that far, to then have to go through swamps to make it to water to escape. All right. And then, of course, looking at how far in that the settlement was, it was more closer to water than it was closer to going further into the wilderness, which is where the Indians would have been living. All right, outside of this Jamestown settlement itself. So if you go to Jamestown, it really gives a picture of the difficulty that slaves would have had in escaping as they were being brought into Jamestown, because of the way that Jamestown is set up, because of the way the settlements are set up. Once we got on this part, our particular part, we did the biking first before we went in to do the tour. As we were biking, it was literally like I started singing, my spirit just wanted to start singing freedom songs. And so I began to sing unto the Lord and prophesy to the land through song. And some of the things that I sensed were the fact that God never intended for humans to be treated the way they were being treated. And there's no amount of excusing what happened to our ancestors. That was something that I felt very strongly when I was at Jamestown. And so my husband did get a little bit of the prophecy that I released while we were biking. The other part was, as we were biking, I had an open vision. And in this open vision, I saw slaves that were lined on both sides of the street, because both sides of this trail still had all of the woods up, and swamp on either side of this trail. So this open vision happens, and I see slaves who are hiding behind trees, almost like someone who is playing hide and seek. And they were hiding behind the trees, good morning, but they were looking out at us. And it was a very emotional experience. I can't really describe everything that I felt in that moment. But as I was praying and singing and prophesying, I was asking the Lord, what did I just see? Because I don't ever want to assume, just because I am viewing something as a vision, I don't ever want to assume that I know the interpretation of what God is trying to show me. So I asked the Lord, what is it that I am seeing? And he said, you are seeing the ancestors who could not see this day. You are seeing the ancestors who prayed for this day to come. They could not see into the future that the same place, the same ground that they were brought as captives, that hundreds of years later, you all would be here singing about freedom, declaring freedom over the land. Yeah. I'm still marinating on that because that was, yeah. So after we got off the trail, I was already messed up. I was already messed up in the Holy Spirit once we got off the trail. And I was like, okay, let us go find us a tour. So we happened to make it right in time back to the main building to go on the 2 o'clock tour. They may move the tour time, but if you are in the Jamestown area or you're planning to go to that area, I recommend that you look for the tour called The First Africans. This is a new tour to Jamestown. And I want to explain, that's why I'm taking my time over 3 days. I want to explain to you the importance of this tour as the tour guide shared with us. And you can actually watch some of the clips of the tour guide speaking. They're right here on my Periscope. The snippets that I was able to get while to get signal out there. All right. And where he is speaking is the shore where the first slaves came. All right. So we get there. We're looking. We're trying to figure out what tour is next. We see the first Africans. So we go. And as you're walking out to meet the tour guide, the very first thing that you really run into and see is this huge obelisk standing there that becomes the monument that we meet the tour guide at. And so again, I want to ask the question, why is there an obelisk, an Egyptian symbol, also a symbol of white supremacy, smack dab in the middle of Jamestown settlement? All right. It was erected there. It wasn't erected there in the past. So we meet him at this obelisk, and he's already kind of starting his tour. But what he says is that his tour began, I believe, honey, correct me if I'm wrong, this particular tour began in February of this year. That means in all the time that these settlements have been open, there has been no acknowledgement, zero acknowledgement in the tours, the historical tours they give of Jamestown, of the presence of Africans at Jamestown. I want you to let that sink in. That means that all of the people who have ever come before 2018 to Jamestown to hear about the history of Jamestown have never heard a tour addressing the fact that the first Africans came through Jamestown. I want you to let that sink in. Let it sink all the way in. So in 399 years, and however many years that this site has been open historically, I have to go back and look at my paper and see if it says when the site opened. All right. Let me see. It doesn't say it on here, but I'll have to find it. All right. The Historic Preservation Company, known as, where is it? Known as Preservation Virginia, for the first time ever, is allowing the story of the first Africans to be told. And it is 2018. So this tour guide, a white gentleman, was really fired up to share with us what he knew and what he had discovered about the first Africans. He wrote his own tour speech, so to speak. And I had to commend him at the end of his tour. He gave a 1-hour lecture and guided us around to the different sites. And he let white America have it, which is rare in a tour guide who actually tells it like it is to 60 white people who come from all over the world to learn about Jamestown. And I also commended the white people who didn't skip this tour, the first Africans, and only want to hear the tour about the excavated sites, because those are two very different tours. All right. So this tour guide, his entire tour was about the first Africans. It was about how they were treated as opposed to the indentured servants, and how they would not have been indentured servants because indentured servants were allowed to be on the top of a ship coming in, whereas the enslaved were in the bottom hole of the ship. So even in their positioning in coming into the country, you knew whether or not they were slaves or whether they were indentured servants. It was a very, and yes, and he talked about the fact that indentured servants, as we know, were freed after 7 years. They were treated badly, but they were freed after 7 years, whereas the slaves were enslaved into perpetuity, meaning not only were they slaves, but every seed that came out of them from then on out would be slaves. He also talked a little bit about Bacon's Rebellion and how the white indentured servants and the black enslaved got together and they rebelled together. So they had to fix that. They had to separate the poor blacks and the indentured, the poor whites and the indentured servant whites from the enslaved black people. And one of the main ways they did it was by increasing the restrictions on the enslaved black people and by giving white people, the indentured servants, who then eventually got free after 7 years, by giving them more freedoms. So even though they were poor and white, they still had more freedoms than the enslaved. And so that's how they increased the divide between them, by giving them more social privileges than the black enslaved, who they were pretty much in the same conditions like, but one. So Jamestown, Williamsburg, Jamestown, we began to get a greater picture of the life of the slave. One of the slaves that is actually documented that came from the original group of slaves that came in, she stayed in Jamestown from 1619 to at least 1630. They have her documented in their papers, and so they do know the name of one of the slaves that were the original ones to America, and her name was Angelo. And so now what they're doing at the Jamestown site is they're now doing an excavation trying to find out more about Angelo the slave, a female slave, and seeing if they can excavate more information about her, because they did find a roll of goods and her name was on that roll of other items. So they do know her name. So this is the statue of Pocahontas that is out there. That looks very, very westernized. I will reserve my opinions on that. But it looks very, very westernized. Their statue of Pocahontas. All right. And her full name was Matoaka Pocahontas, and her English name was Rebecca. In case you didn't know. In June of 1606, King James I granted a charter to a group of London entrepreneurs, the Virginia Company, to establish an English settlement in the Chesapeake region of North America. In December of that year, 104 settlers sailed from London with company instructions to build a secure settlement, find gold, and seek a water route to the Pacific. On May 14, 1607, the Virginia Company settlers landed on Jamestown Island to establish an English colony 60 miles from the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. The Virginia Company tried to intensify the focus on money-making industries with the first supply to Jamestown. But disease, famine, and sporadic attacks from the Powhatan Indians took a tremendous toll on the population of the settlement. There were also times when trade with the Powhatan revived the colony with food in exchange for glass beads, copper, and iron implements. Captain John Smith, that's his name, was particularly good at this trade. Only the arrival of the new governor, Lord Delaware, and his supply ship set the colony back on its feet. Some years of peace and prosperity followed the 1614 wedding of Pocahontas, the favorite daughter of Chief Powhatan, to tobacco grower John Rolfe. Now, think about that. One of the things that the tour guide pointed out that I thought was very, very powerful, because I had never thought about it in this light, is that the tobacco growing was a drug business. It was a drug trafficking business. They were drug dealers. Oh gosh. The first drug dealers were not out of Colombia or Mexico or Brazil or South. No, the first drug dealers were out of England coming into Virginia. First drug dealers. I said, this man, I said, boy, I need to give him an offering. That tour was so good. Woo! Yeah, so as I said, I got a little bit of an eye-opening education from his tour. But as you can see, at one point, Pocahontas does go to England, where she cannot handle the weather there, and she actually winds up dying in England. Good. Okay, good. So this would have been her English portrait while she was over there in another country. All right. So listen, Jamestown is a must see. Also, the Jamestown Memorial Church. Remember when I said that there, you saw the church there, it's actually getting excavated. This is before they started doing some more excavation on this and some repair to it. This is the Jamestown Memorial Church. Listen to when it was built. Built in 1907. It covers the foundations of other churches that dated back to 1617. It marks the site of the first representative assembly meeting in 1619 with the arrival of the slaves. Virginia's General Assembly laid the foundation for the great American tradition of self-governance. This is the church that black people were not allowed to go into. Much less go into the church. They were not even allowed to go through the gate leading to the church. That's not on this card either, by the way. All right. But our tour guide made sure that we knew that. One more thing as far as visuals for today. I want people to understand something, and I did not understand fully why the Lord said, I'm sending you and your husband to Virginia. I mean, I knew that Virginia was like ground zero for racism, and the color lines that were drawn, they were drawn in Virginia. Ground zero. We were actually at ground zero of where the color lines were drawn. But I want to read this to you, and then I'm going to show you something about the territory at the time named Virginia. And then you will probably understand the same thing that I understood, and that's why I bought this postcard. King James the First, 1609 charter to the Virginia Company of London gave it the right to settle anywhere. They had the right to settle anywhere between the 34th and 41st degrees of latitude. That meant, listen, that Virginia extended from Long Island, New York. Sounds familiar. I think that was listed on in the movie The First Purge as to where it happened. Long Island, New York, to below Cape Hatteras and westward all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Now, mind you, these people have never been over here, but they're already mapping out territory and giving it to people. They're not paying attention to the fact that there could possibly be other people here. They're just deciding what territory they're going to get. When the Treaty of Paris ended the American Revolution in 1783, the boundary was set between the new United States and British Canada. Lands west of the Mississippi River, claimed by Virginia under the 1609 charter, were acknowledged to belong to Spain, which had also fought Great Britain from 1779 to 1783. During the Revolution, Virginia sent George Rogers Clark to the Illinois and Indiana country to expel the British from areas that were now claimed by Virginia. In December 1781, Virginia agreed to cede its territories north of the Ohio River to the Confederation Congress, which later made the area the Northwest Territory. The formal cession took place in 1784. On December 31st, 1776, Kentucky became part of Virginia and remained a county until it was admitted to the Union as the 15th state in 1792. 50 northwestern counties in Virginia refused to join the Confederate States of America. So in 1863, the United States Congress admitted them to the Union as the state of West Virginia. The boundaries of Virginia have remained the same since then. This map display is part of the permanent exhibition, The Story of Virginia, an American Experience, at the Virginia Historical Society located in Richmond. So this is just a postcard of the larger exhibition. Okay, so follow me here based on what they just said. All right, this was Virginia. All of this was Virginia. Got it? Got it, intercessors, prayer warriors, pastors, teachers, prophets? Do you get it now? All of this used to be Virginia. This is why Charlottesville was a flashpoint. All across the country. Because spiritually and originally, those were the boundaries of Virginia. So, when we talk about the mindset of the South, I want you to start rethinking that. And if your state falls anywhere in between this territory, I'm going to need you to up your intercession. Oh boy. All right. So This was Virginia 1609 to 1783. Then this became Virginia in 1783. And then from 1784 to 1792, this became Virginia. And then 1792 to 1863, right at the start of the Civil War, this became Virginia. And then, because, as they said, a part of Virginia did not want to have anything to do with the foolishness of maintaining slavery, they became West Virginia, and this has been the size of Virginia since 1863. But this was, when they said Virginia, that's what they meant. When we think of Virginia, this is what we think of. All right? But the original documents discussing Virginia, this is what they were talking about. All right? That's a huge difference. That's a huge difference in thought. So, for those of us who think that the Midwest and the West Coast are possibly less racist, let's just say we got a taste of how untrue that was recently. All right? So, let me continue on here. All right. So here, that was Jamestown. Then we go to all right. Oh, this is good. This is actually really good. This is one of the maps I got from Jamestown. Good. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting excited here. You can actually see on here. Yeah. Hold this. This is the obelisk that we had to meet at. And this right here. It's called the Tercentenary Monument, and it commemorated Jamestown's 300th anniversary. 300th anniversary. So that means it would have been put up when? 100 years ago, 1918? Yeah. 1918. All right. So, yeah. That was put up. Actually, because it starts at 1607, it would have been 1907. My bad. Excuse me. So yeah, it was put up in 1907, and it included a major exposition in Norfolk, Virginia, with a dedication ceremony at Jamestown for the newly constructed Memorial Church. The 350th anniversary, which happened in 1957, was highlighted by the visit of Queen Elizabeth II at the Jamestown Festival and the completion of Colonial Parkway and visitor facilities on Jamestown Island. So about 1957 is when they started completing the other parts of this museum. Just keep that in mind. All right. The 400th anniversary, which was held in 2007, was commemorated with improvements like the Archaearium, a visitor center, research center, events throughout the year. All right. And then here, the quote unquote quiet paths of Newtown. That's the area that we were walking in. And right along this shore area here would have been where the first Africans came to the Americas. One thing that the tour guide said to us, he wanted to make it very clear, is that there is zero, it's 2018. There is no statue, there is no sign, there is no brass plate or anything that marks that Africans were there. It's 2018. Tour guide is a little outraged and still appalled that there is nothing there that marks and commemorates where the very first Africans arrived on the shores. And they know where the very first Africans arrived on the shores. And the early members of Preservation Virginia said this from the tour guide, and I quote, "Those black African slaves were not important to the story that we want to tell. It's not necessary to tell their story." And so now this tour, The First Africans, is trying to correct the omission of the story of the first Africans that came to Jamestown. And they're now in 2018 finally trying to correct the fact that no mention, no marker, no memorial, no sign, no zero zip, not a noche is there on the site. So let me tell you, if you get upset about stuff like that, you might want to pray before you go to Jamestown, because there is nothing there on that site that commemorates that slaves entered here. There's also nothing on that site that commemorates black people were even there. And I wish Lady Apostle was on here, because she was also in Williamsburg, and she went to the museums in Williamsburg, the Civil War Museum, and she said there are no black people in the museum. So again, this region, by their own admission, has really yet to come to terms with black people's existence. So that tells me something about the people living there. You don't even acknowledge my ancestors. Just pause and think about that. Okay? Let's see, what else? Oh, this is good. This picture down here shows you a little bit of the trail that we went on, the Island Drive Trail. You see this image here below? Part of the driveway over the swamps is wooden. So this is what we were biking over and through. And on each side is swamp area. So all of the low-lying plains like this, as you're biking by, you look down, it's water. And then there are, dry ground areas, which is over here where the trees are. All right. 5-mile path. Very powerful. I recommend you bike it instead of drive it, because I think you probably get a different feeling from it. One last image, and then I'm moving on to my next map here. This is an image of the whole site that we walked. This is the Jamestown Fort. I'm trying to bring it close enough for you to see it. All right. That's the Jamestown Fort. So that is that huge statue. That is, hold on. Let's see. So when you see this image here, and he looks really close, and the people look really far away, that's the statue there. It's right at the water. All right. And then let's see. Then there is the church. There is I think this is like a grave site here, grave site here, and then you can't really, yeah, you can see the gate. All right, this would have been this little area right here. You see that arch? That would have been the gate that you would have had to come through in order to get to the church that black people were not allowed to go through. All right, so Jamestown. And I was like, Lord Jesus the Christ. So we're in Williamsburg. We have visited Jamestown, and then the next day we go and visit Yorktown. Yorktown being the site of the American Revolution. I don't have very many maps of this. So this is Yorktown. The Riverwalk area of Yorktown reminds me of Savannah. If you've ever been to Savannah's Riverwalk, except they have a lot less shops along their Riverwalk, and they also have like a beach area and an amphitheater area at their Riverwalk. But maybe about, I would say, a mile and a half. Hun, you're a better estimator than I am. Maybe a mile and a half, 2 miles is inward is where we were. So we went over the footbridge. We went to Victory Monument. We went to take a look at some of the houses that are still standing from 1776. From the American Revolution, and they talked about how they were bombing the houses. They talked about the guy, I forget what officer he was representing, but it was like a historical tour where the person got into character and they were explaining the war from their point of view. So after we got done listening to all of this whole speech, oh, it was Nelson. All right. After we got done listening to this speech on the American Revolution, my husband was kind and polite, and he waited until the gentleman was done with his, programmed tour. And so I did film his response. All of these responses and things I have yet to put up because I'm still processing everything. Yeah, he didn't want to wait. So my husband asked him, well, weren't there some black soldiers during the American Revolution? Everybody's seen the movie Glory, right? Right? What wasn't there some black soldiers? Like, none of your presentation mentioned anything about black people playing a part as soldiers in the American Revolution. There's some information missing here. And so he proceeded to answer, but his answer was basically, oh, there were those people. I'm not kidding, guys. I have it on video. There were those people were there on both sides, but they were mainly ditch diggers. They were mainly just digging the ditches and the trenches. They weren't really, a part of the war. Sir, really? Really? Okay. So that was his answer. We didn't bother him about his answer. I just recorded it. Because people need to understand that it's up to you, and it's partly your responsibility to read and know history for yourself. People are going to give tours. They're going to set up monuments that could very well exclude your entire history. So this is one of the reasons why I stress it is important to know history, and it is important to know your history. He said the British offered freedom to the Africans. Yes, the British were the first to offer freedom to the Africans, which is where we get that nice little anthem song that people are upset about, because the third stanza of that anthem song is basically saying death to the enslaved who went over to the side of the British because they offered them freedom. So that was Yorktown. So what did I get from Yorktown? I got from Yorktown that Jamestown is actually a little bit further along than Yorktown is in terms of even trying to acknowledge the presence of black people in this country. Yorktown still doesn't have a tour that talks about that talks about that there were black soldiers participating in the American Revolution. They're not even there yet. They're not. So if I'm wrong, somebody from Yorktown, contact me and I will correct my information. But from the tour we went on, there was no mention of black people and their role in the American Revolution at all. We had to ask, and we asked after the tour just to see if the tour guide even knew. And his response was, well, there were some of those people on both sides. On both sides, there were some of those people, and but they were just digging trenches. So if that is the information that you're presenting to black children who go through your tour sites with their black families, and that is the only information they're getting, that black people were digging ditches during the war, that is problematic. Okay? It's problematic. So, we visited the Triangle. And as we were there with our Latino brothers and sisters in Christ. And it was very interesting because I'll tell you why it was interesting for a few reasons. Because I realized, and we realized, that many of our brothers and sisters in Christ who are Latin, who are identified as white when they come to America, they actually are getting a somewhat different experience of America than the black people who have lived here, who are non-immigrants their entire life. It was beautiful to see my Latin brothers and sisters that come from other countries. Some were from Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil. Yeah, I think that was it. Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil. And their experience of Jamestown, because it's not connected directly to their heritage, was different from our experience of Jamestown. It was. And so we had conversations about how America has dehumanized black people. Some of the things we shared with our Latin brothers and sisters, they had no clue of. They had no idea of. They had not been taught those things about our history. And so, again, it becomes incumbent upon us, as people of African descent, or people of enslaved descent, or people of indigenous Indian American descent, to tell our side of the story. Because if we don't, the information that people receive about us is going to be very skewed. If you are quiet and you are silent about your own history, thinking that someone else is going to tell it properly, they're not. And in the cases that we saw at 3 different historical sites, they're not telling it at all. And in Jamestown, they just now started telling it for 1 hour a day on their tours. If you should choose to go on that tour, which means if you don't go on that tour, you're not going to hear anything about the first Africans. And that is a travesty in and of itself. So we were in what I call now the triangle of white supremacy. If you all can hang with me for about 5 more minutes, and I'll be done with today's segment. We'll be back tomorrow because we're going to talk some more. All right? Again, please invite your white friends, because I keep hearing white people say, I don't understand. Tell me, show me. Okay, I'm teaching this week. Tune in. Listen and learn. Bring a notebook and take notes. All right? We're going to be sharing. All right? But while we were there, we got several expressions of who are you? Why are you here? Who do you think you are? It didn't come from our Latin brothers and sisters. It came from the people and the tourists, either residents or tourists of European descent that were visiting this region. And my husband kept having to say, because they kept saying, who are you and where are you from? And my husband kept purposefully saying, I am from Earth. And they were like, no. I mean, like, really, like, where are you from? No, like, really, I am from Earth. I'm from Earth. And then I got a whole different expression when I said, I am both descendant of slaves and descendant from the indigenous Americans. I am the original people that you're talking to. So don't try it over here. All right? Don't try me. Don't do it. Don't do it. All right? So that's why I said at the end of the tour, I really had to commend the tour guide because he did not mince words. And we need more white people who will tell the truth about our country's history and not mince words. And not try to sugarcoat because they don't want to hurt someone's feelings. No, you need to understand the foundation upon which we stand as a nation. You need to understand the original sins of our nation that are being continually perpetuated and why we cannot heal from this issue. Because how can you heal and you won't even acknowledge that black slaves came to your land? How can you heal from something you won't even acknowledge? Like, we got to start there. And as my husband was saying, we were back in Williamsburg, and then we went into one of the shops, and I immediately started feeling like something's not right about this shop. So we were trying to look for a gift to, kind of say, hey, we were here. At least we were here. But we also noticed about the entire Colonial Williamsburg. I was like, duh, Colonial Williamsburg. That there were no cultural shops there. None. Nothing. It was all colonial. I suppose that is a culture. Yeah. So we go into this gift shop, and I was looking because I like weird socks or whatever, and I was looking at the socks from the main company that they had at the gift shop. And I was looking at all the images. I mean, they had like animals and music socks, and some socks they had of famous people. So I was like, okay, they got socks of famous people. Let me see if one of their pairs of socks got a famous black person on it. And I saw Frida Kahlo and Albert Einstein. I was like, okay, that's nice. I like Einstein and I like Kahlo. She's an artist. I can dig that. But there was no socks of black people on the wall, like in the caricatures of the socks. So my husband was looking for a male pair size of socks, and the lady pointed him to another area that carried the men's versions of the same socks. So he goes over there and he's looking for, a pair of socks, and he has a picture of it. He took a picture of it. I'm sure he'll put on his page sometime this week. And he looks on the wall, and the first pair of socks that he sees is an ape dressed in a suit. And he brings the socks over to me, and I'm like, oh, Lord, we got to get out of here. We got to go. Yeah, we were planning to do business here, but the ape socks got to go. They got to go. So, yeah, we were like, well, looks like we're going to have to find somewhere else to go patronize, because that's not, yeah. So I actually did go on the sock company's website to see if they had any socks with, black people on them. And I did find one pair of socks with Michelle Obama on them, and that was it. I was like, well, at least they got Michelle Obama. But in the instance, it was problematic, because I'm like, you have icons, you have music, you have pets, you have animals, you have Einstein, you have Frida Kahlo, but I don't see no black people on any of these socks. I got to go. So that was that. One of the things that I did pick up from Jamestown that I have decided that I'm going to utilize is this Pocahontas bell. One thing that I do know about this country, oh, no President Obama, no. The sock company only had Michelle, and it was a very weird looking cartoon of her. So I was like, I'm not getting those. So this bell has Pocahontas at the top, and I bought it because when I go out to these sites from now on, I'm going to be taking Pocahontas with me. I am. And I just thought I think it's interesting that because America is really built on capitalism, we can find a million ways to capitalize off of those who no longer exist. If I could put it that way. We can find thousands of ways to monetize black pain, black extinction, Indian extinction. We can find ways to do that. So when I go out to my next sites, this is what I'm going to be doing. And I'm going to be declaring that actual true freedom will ring in America. Freedom, let real freedom ring. Let real righteousness ring. Let real truth ring from the heart of America. I also took some stones got some stones from the actual grounds of Jamestown. I got 12 stones for the 12 tribes. Gonna figure out what to do with them. I don't know if I'm going to mount them into something later. But I got 12 stones from the ground. And I don't want no rocks crying out. So we continue to grind into and to focus in on this topic of America's original sin, because now, having been to the triangle of white supremacy, because that's where white supremacy was established in this country, in that triangle, having been to ground zero of white supremacy, I now understand why people are having these instances in their life where they feel like the ground is crying out. I've talked to several black people now who have said that they've either been on slave grounds and they've actually heard the cries of slaves, or like myself, they experienced some kind of vision about slaves in an area. But I think I understand more about why we're having these experiences. Because guess what? Their voice still hasn't been heard. Their story, for the most part, still hasn't been told. So, yeah, we're going to be hearing things spiritually that is crying out because they're crying out to be heard. Continually left out of the story of this country. So, I want to thank you for giving me some extra time today to express this part. Tomorrow we're going to come back and we're going to share a little bit more. I'm going to get into some of the books that we've been reading to tie in some more history for you. But I wanted to share specifically about my experiences in Yorktown, Jamestown, and Williamsburg. It is a triangle of oppression. You can feel it there. The people are very unapologetically colonial in their behavior, in their actions, in their speech. And that's why I will continue to say, hats off to those of you who live, who work, who serve, and have a calling to that region. You are the real MVPs because you are at ground zero. Really at ground zero. I thought we were dealing with some things in the places we are in, but you all are at ground zero. And so the acknowledgement of the black existence is challenged there. Not just from the historical standpoint, but also from the present day standpoint. So I'm going to be praying. Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown is now on my prayer agenda, along with some other places in Virginia, but specifically those three. So I want to thank you for your time and attention. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues. I have been your host today, Shantae Charles. I will be back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we're going to continue talking about white supremacy. Tomorrow, we're going to be in this book here. This is a new book I'm introducing because I was trying to wait to get to it, but we got to get to it now because of what I see happening. This book is entitled Everything You Love Will Burn. Everything You Love Will Burn. Inside the Rebirth of White Nationalism in America. Inside the Rebirth of White Nationalism in America. All right. And it's talking about all of the new groups that have arisen that you may not be aware of, that wear different names, but they all operate under the banner of white nationalism and white supremacy. Tomorrow, we're going to also have some conversation around something that was delivered to me several times last night in my inbox. And that was the conversation that happened last night between Jeremiah Johnson and Corey Robinson. I did respond directly onto their broadcast in several places. So if you go check out that broadcast from last night, you will see all of my responses to some of the things that were said. But we're going to talk tomorrow also about white nationalism and the Christian white nationalists and the Christian racists that are in the church and are hiding behind patriotism. It's going to be a fun conversation tomorrow. So make sure your white friends tune in, all right? Hopefully they will learn something, because I think that many of our white friends are defending people who are actually white nationalists, who are hiding behind the banner of Christ and hiding behind the flag and patriotism. And they need to be aware. So hopefully you will invite some people in tomorrow, and I will see you then. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness, so please go out today and be light. Take care, and God bless.